as much as I hate to say this at the beginning of a video, I am not twisting facts. I am not going to be dealing with anything dealing with politics. I'm just going to tell you how it is. So if this offends you, I'm sorry. I don't mean it as an offensive topic, but it's a topic I feel that we should talk about. So this Table Talk Thursday is actually dealing with African Americans after the Civil War, after they're freed from slaves, and who actually helped them. And we're going to look at it from the beginning. So the sources I mostly used was this documentary Aftershock and a textbook. Yeah, giant textbook. So these are reputable sources. Aftershock's produced by History Channel, and that's the American Pageant, which is a Cengage book. So that's used for AP, by the way. So after Civil War ends, we have a period known as Reconstruction. And we have a group known as the Radical Republicans, who they didn't want to talk about change happening years down the road. They wanted it to happen immediately. And as soon as 1865 hit, if you were living in the South, if you were a Republican, white or black, you had a target on your back, because everybody in the South saw the Republicans as a reason why slavery ended, why their society was changing, and they didn't like it. And the Radical Republicans create something known as the Freedmen's Bureau to help freed slaves get education and land and to be treated properly, because they didn't know how to read or write. The Freedmen's Bureau would go over all of their contracts and say, okay, you can't do this, this, or this. But unfortunately, we had a president, Andrew Johnson, who didn't really like African Americans. He was against slavery, but he wasn't for making them any equal in any way. Like, it's really confusing. But Johnson was Lincoln's vice president. He was Lincoln's running mate. But Johnson was a Democratic senator who was from Tennessee. And the reason why he didn't like slavery was because it oppressed the poor white farmers. So that's why he opposed slavery. So he was kind of not into doing anything to help any African American after they were freed. He really didn't care. And the Republican-led Congress at the time ends up outvoting Johnson on several issues dealing with helping African Americans, because he'll veto it and send it back to them, and they'll vote over it and overturn his veto. So that's Johnson, and that's Aftershock. Now let's just get into the civil rights bills themselves, because there's four or five major ones I talk about, because I think I cut one of them. There's four major ones I talk about. The first one is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is going to be passed by the Republican Congress, but it's going to be vetoed by Johnson for the 14th Amendment. I couldn't find the breakdown on that one because it was so far back, but it pretty much said if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen, you can't deny anybody citizenship in the United States, and it's pretty much what the 14th Amendment is. Remember, the 13th frees the slaves, the 14th guarantees rights. Now, the Second Civil Rights Act is passed in 1875. It's also known as the Enforcement Act, which guarantees access for African Americans, keep this in mind, to accommodations, public transports, and trial by jury. Before this act is passed, African Americans in the South suffer for being in jail for very long periods of time. They can't gain public transportation, and they're literally gridlocked. They try to keep them in the area because a lot of these plantations, they still need people working on them. And a lot of their mindsets in the South was if you could keep your former slaves there, then you can make them work and treat them like the Civil War never even happened. And that's what happened a lot of times in the South, and a lot of the Democratic and Republican senators of the South ignored it. Not all, but most of them did. And when it came to voting, a lot of times you'll see the breakdown between the bills. And for this one, this is the 43rd Congress. You have 50 Republicans at the beginning and 51 at the end in the Senate. You have 19 Democrats in the beginning and 20 at the end. The House was 91 Democrats at the beginning and 98 at the end. And Republicans were 189 at the beginning and 199 at the end. Now, I can find the breakdown of the parties to see who voted which way, But in the House, this bill passed 162 to 99, and the Senate was 38 to 26. So you do have people who abstained for voting, and you did have people who voted against it. So more than likely, out of that 162, a lot of those votes probably were Republicans. And the reason why I say this is because the Republican Party was founded and wanted to free the slaves. Lincoln, not as much. He wanted to keep the Union together, but a lot of the Republicans saw this as a horrible movement, and a lot of the Republicans were abolitionists. And this bill is actually introduced by two Republicans, Representative from the House, Benjamin Butler, and Senator Sumner. Now, Charles Sumner, if you remember in the Civil War, if you've taken 11th grade history probably, you'll remember hearing about the attack on the Congress floor. This is Charles Sumner, who is the one who's almost beaten to death after giving his speech, Crimes Against Kansas, in 1865. And he was attacked by Democratic representative from South Carolina, Preston T. Booker, with a cane, because Booker was a staunch slaveholder. He believed in slavery, and he felt that Sumner offended him by saying that we need to treat all men equal, and he also felt that Sumner insulted his family. So that's kind of an interesting point when you look at this historical concept of who helped the African Americans, because it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag towards the end, but at the beginning it is really the Republican Party who ends up backing them up, and there's a few more surprises on the way. Now, the next major Civil Rights Act is the Civil Rights Act of 1957. This is going to be the first Civil Rights Act addressing anything since the 1875 Act, so almost 100 years. And this dealt with voting rights and support for Brown versus Board of Education. Again, I can't find the exact breakdown but for Republicans and Democrats, but it was passed in the House 285 to 126, and in the House you have 167 Republicans, the vote was 167 Republicans for, 19 against. Democrats was 118 for, 107 against. Notice that percentage-wise, the Republicans were more in support of it, while the Democrats were more against it. I mean, 118 to 107, you have 224 Democrats, and you have almost the same amount vote for it as against it, which really speaks a lot to the time period. Then the Senate, it was 72 to 18. All the Republicans were for it, all 43 of them, and the Democrats was 29 for and 18 against. Once again, you kind of see that take and give. Now, who was the president during this time? It's Dwight D. Eisenhower. It's General Eisenhower. And he signs this into law September 9th, 1957, meaning you have this Republican push, once again, to improve African American lives, to allow them to vote, to stop this Jim Crow segregation. And Jim Crow is what it's actually called. Jim Crow simply is the concept in the South where whites have their own bathroom, blacks have their own. Whites sit in the front of the bus, blacks sit in the back. This is what's going on in this historical time period. And back then, you had literacy tests that you had to take to be able to vote. And you had to know, for African Americans at least, you had to know every single judge in the state to pass these tests. But for whites, it was simply, can you read and write? And that's why the Republicans started stepping in. And up until this point in history, the majority of people who voted, who are African American, voted Republican. Since Ulysses S. Grant all the way up until LBJ. And then it switches because LBJ claims a huge victory with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or country of origin. This ends also the testing, the literacy test I just talked about. Now, LBJ claims this as a Democratic victory, even though it was a joint mission by both Republicans and Democrats, and he starts twisting it. And there's a very famous book called The Butler is made into a movie, and there's a part of it where the butler's listening, and he's not really supposed to be, and it's actually an autobiography. And the guy is African American, and he recalls LBJ saying, "I'll have the black community voting for the Democrats for the next 100 years." And that's kind of what happened, because there was a twist. This got really twisted. And when I start talking about this with friends who are African American, and we've had these discussions, they have this mindset until I show them the evidence that I'm absolutely wrong. And when I show it to them, they kind of get really confused. And it's because after the 64 Voting Rights Act, a lot of the stuff that the Republicans did for some odd reason was now attributed to the Democrats. Even though the Democrats founded the KKK, even though the Democrats blocked hundreds of bills to have African Americans empowered, even though a Democratic president, who I will talk about, removed all African Americans from public office. So they couldn't serve as a postmaster because he didn't like it. But to go back to the 64, it passed the Senate by 73 votes to 27. The Senate and the House by 290 to 130. The Democrats in the Senate made up 64. At the end, it was 65. Republicans were 34 and ends at 35. The House was Democrat 258. At the end, it was 255. And Republicans were 117 to, at the end, 177. Or 176, sorry. It starts off 176, ends 177. Now, here's the very interesting part. I was able to find the percentage breakdown. So, the Democrats in the House vote for the original bill 152 to 96. So 61% voted for it, 39% voted against it. The Republicans, though, are 138 to 35, meaning 88% voted for the Civil Rights Bill and 20 voted against it. So compare the Republican 88% voting for it to the Democrat 61%, and it kind of makes the point itself who was really helping the African American community, who really wanted to pass this bill. And honestly, LBJ had to bully his own party into passing the bill, because he knew if he didn't pass it, he wasn't going to get elected, and that's the only reason why he took up this issue. Now, the closed Senate session on this bill, the Democrats voted 46 for, 21 against, which is 69% to 31%, and the Republicans voted 27 to 6, meaning 82% supported it, but 18 didn't. Again, the Republicans have 82% voting for it, while the Democrats have 69. But this is what's really interesting. In the open session, Democrats vote 46 to 21 once again, and the Republicans vote exactly the same way. So it's not like they changed their mind in any way. Now, when the House revotes on the Senate version, because the Senate changed the bill and then sent it back to the House, the Democrats vote 153 to 91, which is 63% for and 37% against. And the first time they voted on it, you had 61% for and 39% against it. So you have kind of an increase in the Democrats for it. The Republicans is 136 to 35, which is exactly the same. So the Republicans didn't change their mind. And the reason why you have the increase in vote by 1 is probably because LBJ had to literally grab a senator from Texas and shake him and say, if you don't vote for this, I'm going to do mean things to you. Pretty much he drove the guy to vote for it. Now here's the breakdown of people who voted for the law by geography. So Southern Democrats, 8 voted for it, 87 against, so 7% of the Southern Democrats supported it, 93 did not. Southern Republicans in the Senate were 0 to 10, so none of them supported it, all of them opposed it. Northern Democrats was 145 to 9, so 94% of the Northern Democrats supported it to 6 who didn't. Northern Republicans was 183 to 24, which meant 85% supported it, 15 did not. Once again, the northern states, you kind of have to figure that, and that's just the House of Representatives. Now the Senate, you have 1 Southern Democrat senator vote, so 5%, and they had 20. So 95 opposed it. The only Democratic senator from the South to vote for this is Ralph Younger of Texas. So congratulations to him. I mean, that's pretty amazing that he stood up against his party in that way. Southern Republicans, there's only one and he votes against it. Now, Northern Democrats, 45 are for it, 1 is against it, so 98% is for it. One guy, his name is Robert Byrd of West Virginia, votes against it. Northern Republicans is 27% for it, or 27 for it, 5 against, 84% for it, 16 against. So that bill kind of is the changing point where we see the change in the structure of the concept of who's helping African Americans. But if you trace it historically back, Republicans have done more to help African Americans than Democrats. And I'm just presenting facts. You have to understand that Ku Klux Klan, which was founded in 1866, was founded to fight the Republican Party and African Americans. It was a movement by Confederate soldiers who had come back, who were mostly Democratic, and when Johnson's in power, nothing happens to them. And then when we have a new election and we have Ulysses S. Grant, who is a Republican, who was the general during the Civil War, when he comes into office, he starts fighting the Ku Klux Klan. And then in 1871, the Republican Congress and Senate, or House and Senate, will pass the Ku Klux Klan Act, meaning that Grant can now send federal troops in to fight the Klan, to stop them from attacking citizens, to stop them from attacking blacks, to stop them from attacking Republicans. Now, another group that really surprises a lot of people that was created to help, especially in the South, help African Americans in the South, is actually the NRA, the National Rifle Association. And it was founded around the same time as the Ku Klux Klan, right after the Civil War, but their purpose was to teach people how to protect themselves. And the NRA is the first group to really lobby against this concept where African Americans should not have arms. And in the South, there was a lot of laws restricting what type of weapons African Americans could have. Like, they couldn't buy shotguns, they couldn't buy guns. And the NRA comes in and starts lobbying, and during the Civil Rights Movement, they lobby and repeal a lot of these laws, and then they go out and they buy the shotguns, they buy the bullets, they buy the regular guns, and they buy all the ammunition and hand it out to these African American communities and teach them how to shoot to protect themselves from Klansmen who are trying to kill them because they're trying to gain equal rights. And this is what's crazy to me, is everybody villainizes the NRA, but they're the ones who marched with Martin Luther King at Selma. They were the protection. They protected MLK, and he trusted them. They stood up for the African American community. So I don't see why African Americans who are part of the NRA are shamed, or African Americans who are a part of the Republican Party are shamed, because I just watched an interview of an African American who is a well-known Republican, and I'm not going to say who, where he says that he's been told that he's a sellout, that he wants to be white, that he's an Uncle Tom, and it's ridiculous because he's chosen his party because that's how he feels. You shouldn't be shamed into joining a party just because everybody else is a part of it. That's why we ended up with the Nazis, for God's sakes. I mean, come on. But the last one I want to talk about on this topic is Woodrow Wilson. And he is the first Democratic president from the South elected after the Civil War. And he's also our only president to have a PhD. And he's racist. I mean, I can't even hide that fact. Woodrow Wilson is probably one of the most racist presidents in our history after the Civil War. My disclaimer there, because there's a lot before it too. But Woodrow Wilson goes as far as to remove all African Americans from civil service, meaning they can't work in the post office, they can't be postmasters, they can't do city jobs. He removes all that. He says they can't do it. He refuses to let any of them do it, reversing laws and practices put in place by those who came before him, like Teddy Roosevelt and Taft. Both of those men worked to include African Americans, and Wilson just destroys it. I mean, it doesn't go back. You don't see African Americans become equal in the civil service until about the 1950s, and I'm talking about 1910. That's ridiculous, and that's something that a lot of people ignore. And what's even worse to me, what's 100 million times worse, is he shows the movie, a private showing of the movie Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith, which is the glorification of the Ku Klux Klan, if you don't know what that is, and it's the most racist movie you'll ever see. He shows it, Woodrow Wilson shows it as a private showing in the White House, and then laughs when there's protests against this movie by African American communities, I think that's ridiculous. And that's why I feel if you're going to teach history, don't change it. Teach it how it is, because then you're going to have groups of people who don't understand the true concept. And that's my Table Talk Thursday on Jim Crow. Who really helped African Americans? Was it the Republicans or was it the Democrats? It's a mixed bag. I can honestly say that. But I feel that it's been twisted to make the Democrats look like the heroes and the Republicans look like the villains. And I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I mean, I was watching a video the other day on Facebook where this 16-year-old African American boy who is very, very fluid in his speaking, and you could tell how intelligent he was told that he was a disgrace to his race because he liked Donald Trump and that he said all lives matter, by a 36-year-old man, a 16-year-old boy being yelled at by a 36-year-old man, and they're both African Americans, and he's saying he's a disgrace. And when the man goes, well, who are your parents voting for? And the kid says Trump, he says that his parents are a disgrace to America too. Why? Why do you feel the need to shame like this? It bothers me. This is why politics bothers me. Because you're going to shame somebody because you feel like you have to be superior. And I'm sorry, both parties have a checkered past. Sorry, here's the news. Get over it. So, next week's Table Talk Thursday, I'm going to do it on the plight of the immigrants in the 19th century, and we're going to talk about, should we teach how horrible the situation for the 19th century immigrants, especially Irish and Italians, were. So leave a comment down below if you have another topic you'd like me to talk about. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a comment of your thoughts. Well, that's all I have. Bye, guys.